All right. Hello, my students. This is another one of my interview with a animator. Today we have Laban Dickinson, who is international. He lives in New Zealand. And he's going to talk to us about his, time and experience in the industry. So Laban, is there any of my work that you think my American students might have seen?
Well, we did just get nominated for an Emmy Award, which we were at
Nice. That's
last
something.
week up in
Wow.
LA. That was with Disney, which is one of our main clients here out of New Zealand. It was called How Not to Draw. It was nominated for a short form animated program. Unfortunately, we didn't win. We lost to the very well crafted short film that Disney put out last year, Once Upon a Studio, I think it was called, which was
Yeah,
very traditional, very beautiful. So, but we were very excited to be there. It's a really cool show that kind of takes Disney television IP and feature IP, and it basically is like if you remember the old Chuck Jones short with Daffy Duck where he gets his face rubbed out by a pencil. It's kind of
yeah,
a little
that
like
classic
that, where
analogy.
it's around the characters interacting with an animator off screen. We see his hands, but we don't
Right. Very
see.
fourth wall breaking.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a dialogue back and forth between the characters and the animator, and they get into shenanigans, and yeah,
Sure.
we've done. Yeah, so cool. So it was very. So you may have seen that. We also did a short called "From Our Family to Yours," which was done about. I think it was in the first year of COVID. So that was a Christmas campaign out of the
Okay.
UK with Disney, and that's on Disney Plus. There were 3 shorts done like that. They were just Christmas campaigns. It were kind of in like a traditional Disney Pixar kind of 3D style, which got really good accolades around the world and really good traction. But it was just really charming kind of 3 to 5 minute shorts around Christmas and family and stuff, which we created here alongside our friends out of the Disney UK. And yeah, that was really well received and really, a pinnacle kind of moment in my career from a storytelling point of view and from Flux's point of view, kind of, pushing our craft and stuff. So hopefully those are all on Disney Plus. So you can look those up if you want to, but
Okay.
the kind of, yeah, both those shows are there. So yeah, you can look them up. But yes, work that we're really proud of.
Right. So where does your beginning or love of animation start, if you don't mind that?
So I'm kind of fortunate, I guess, or not fortunate, depends on how you look at it. I've never had another job in my life. I've never I started off as a cartoonist when I was 15 for magazines at high school. I knew pretty early on, I think, like once you grew up in the era of the 90s with that kind of Disney feature animation that really kind of
Right.
that was my goal, was always to kind of be a traditional animator in that sense. And then
Yeah.
so when I was at high school, I just started doing cartoons and applying to magazines and saying, do you guys want me to run some strips? And they did. So I did that.
Oh,
So that was kind of my jumping off point, and it was a really good kind of grounding. And when you're doing comics and stuff in that early age, you have a lot of. I look back on them now and they're quite cringy because you're talking about what a 15 excuse me, what a 15-year-old boy thinks is
right,
fun,
right, sure.
and it's
Especially in the 90s.
yeah. It's like my kids saw them the other day, and I was like, I don't know if that's appropriate. They were interested in the fact that you could kind of tell your own stories and stuff that you were interested in, and good to learn around story structure and dialogue and stuff like that. And then as I got a little bit older, once I started getting to the end of high school, I really started focusing in on trying to set myself up. I knew I wanted to go into animation.
Sure.
So I just kind of, before studying as such, I just kind of put all my effort into kind of learning what I could. This was kind of it wasn't pre-internet, but there wasn't that much stuff online. So you're still learning with books and stuff, which was kind of cool. I bought The Illusion of Life, which is a great book if you haven't come across it.
My book yet.
Yeah, so
Still holds up.
Yeah, still it's still the Bible. So there's that, and there's another one by Richard Williams, which I can't remember the name of it, but those, even from like just ordering them on Amazon back in the day and then just studying them, was a good jumping off point, I think. And so I think for me, I was just, I just really wanted to go all in. There was no real other option of what I wanted to do, even
Mm.
to probably my parents kind of going like, I don't know if that's such a good career path, you know. And it's a tricky one because, it's, if we were smart, we would become accountants or would become,
Right.
lawyers or doctors, but we don't
Sure.
want to do that. We want to chase what
Raw
we're
stuff.
passionate about, and
Right.
that has merit and stuff. And if you can pull it off, you have the best careers in the world.
So before we kind of officially started, you were telling me you went to college or art school, but you didn't finish. Is that correct?
No, so I basically, and I think there's many roads to get to where you want to go. I started doing a 3-year course in traditional animation. So there's a school here in New Zealand called Freelance Animation School. It was started by a guy called John Ewing, who was not one of the 9 old men, but he was under the 9 old men at Disney. So he was an old boy, and
Right.
he married a New Zealander and came out to New Zealand when he was like 70 or like late 60s kind of thing. He started the industry. He started the industry here, so he started up a school, which was also kind of working as somewhat of a studio on the side. So they were working for a show called Tiny Toons back in the day.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so they kind of started this, but the school at that point was very much focused on 2D, so
Sure.
there was no 3D component. It was basically, we'd learn cleanup and we'd learn in betweening
Right.
and animation, and then as the years progressed, then you start learning around story structure and doing short films. For me, however,
Sure. Sure.
I applied to a studio in New Zealand in the first break of the first semester, just simply to come in and do some work experience for them for the couple of weeks that we had off.
Sure.
I did, and they offered me a job after that, so I took it.
Had to learn on the job.
Yeah. Well, there's like I said, there's so many different pathways to get to where you want to get to. I think for me, because I kind of knew what I wanted to get to or what I wanted to be, my end goal was to try to get into the studio. And then when they offered me a job, I was like, okay, let's kind of go again to my parents probably would have disagreed and were trying to convince me not to. But it's kind of so many different ways to get to the end result, I think. But it worked out for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of my friends' name is Arnie Wong, and he's an old school animator. Like he worked on Tron in the 80s. And he used to run a studio in the LA area, and he talks about how, when people would apply, they would just like take all their portfolios and just put them on and be like, yes, no, So it wasn't, I mean, not to say that you can't learn stuff from an art school, of course you can, but it's like, it's not so much the degree, but the showing that you can apply knowledge.
Exactly. And I think like that's a big part of my role now as the head of the studio from a creative point of view, is going, what we're looking for is fundamentally, there's certain things you can teach as far as animation goes, but what you're looking for, I think from the outset, is kind of like, if someone's a strong draftsman or a draftsperson, you can kind of channel that. Like if the fundamentals are good from a drawing point of view or a storytelling point of view, then we can kind of, they don't have to come through a traditional pipeline and have a short film that they're presenting to us. It can be, hey, listen, that guy can draw. He might not be doing animation, but he can draw, or she can draw. And it could be, or like they're really good at telling stories, but they,
aren't as good at drawing per se.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe good at writing a script or
exactly. So it's kind of, we're always looking for, it's not, it's not as traditional as some people would think. It's kind of, if we see potential in someone, then it's kind of like, okay, we can craft them and mold them for what our studio needs. So, which is kind of, and that's an interesting, it's a lot of the best hires we've done over the last couple of years haven't really come from a traditional animation background. They've come from a fine arts background where they've got really great color sets and stuff like that, or design, and going like, okay, this person understands the fundamentals well. We can teach them the stuff in between.
Yeah, no, I'm a big believer that if you can understand basic artistic slash design
Mhm.
concepts, you can apply those to almost anything. Like
Yeah.
color theory is color theory, whether it's
Mm.
you're developing an app for a smartphone or you're setting the color for an animation. I mean, granted, there's differences for every industry, but it's like it's still color theory or
Of
type
course, yeah.
pacing or elements of storytelling and pacing in the sense of a time-based thing like a film or an animation or something like that. So yeah, no, I agree with you that it's like yeah, you can someone crossing over from fine art to art animation or from design to animation or even vice versa is not
Mm.
out of the
Yeah, I think
norm.
also the other component of that is like when we're talking to people, and quite often, we'll look at people's Instagram and stuff, and they kind of apply or like
Sure.
dive a little bit deeper into, because normally most people will attach their Instagram now because it's got art on there or something like that. But it's kind of seeing like how all in people are and like like what they're interested in and how much enthusiasm they have,
Mm.
a
Oh,
willingness to learn and kind of all that kind of jazz. So we do look at that as well because I think it's really important that, especially when you're young, that work doesn't have to be everything, but I think there's
yeah,
definitely a time in your life where if you want to make it in the industry, it really does need to be quite all encompassing around like, it doesn't stop at
sure.
after after the whistle blows at 5 o'clock, people. I look at myself and some of the best artists that we have here. Like they've always got projects on the side, kind of thing, or interested in other little avenues that are still art related, but just kind of an enthusiasm to learn around craft and applying yourself. I think is like a
Yeah,
key I always look for.
I mean, I always kind of say people get into art related jobs because that's what they want to do. It's not usually
Exactly.
money. I
Yeah.
mean, like there are better ways to make money if that's all you're worried about. Like,
100%.
but you're getting
Yeah.
into it because you love animation, you love drawing, you love whatever, and you just
Mm.
you want it to be perfect. You think about it even when it's not your job, and you're like, if I was doing it, I would do this and this. You know what I mean? All that kind of
Yeah.
it's that desire to create. You know what I
Of
mean?
course, yeah, yeah, totally. And like I think that's probably for some people it's an inherent. You kind of can't not do it. It's like, and also that level of like we're all kind of slightly a little bit mad around kind of to really get good at something, you have to kind of become so focused at it as well. It's like a kind of it's a good thing and it's a bad thing because you become so like I know when I was starting to learn animation, it was just like that was all I was thinking about. But like you're
Right.
walking down the street or you're having a conversation with someone, and you're kind of you're critiquing how they're moving or like when they're blinking. Like
There's
like
like
as I've gotten
not
older,
enough
it's not,
exaggeration in their expression,
no, totally. Like
feeling
oh,
the
there's not enough. Yeah,
emotion.
there's not enough.
Their
There's
eyes
got
need
a
to
lot.
come out a little bit, like
Yeah,
Betty
guys got a lot
Boop.
of follow through on his walk. So yeah, like I think as you get older, but I remember at a certain point when I was in my early 20s, that was kind of I'd take notes and stuff like that,
Right.
or it seems intense, but it's kind of I think it's kind of what got me to where I am today. That level of kind of commitment at that kind of early stage.
So okay, so you get a job at like first third of your or into your first year, you stop at your art school, you go to this studio. How long do you stay with them? Or
Okay, so it's kind of yeah. So basically, this studio was it's a really great studio as far as a good jumping off point for starting my career. It was basically we were doing television series work for Warner Brothers, Disney, and a couple of other UK shows. But there's a show called Static Shock, which is probably the most famous one, which is like a Warner Brothers kind of.
which one? Which story?
It was called Static Shock. It was a
Oh,
comic book.
Static Shock. Okay.
Yeah, and there's a show called Downtown. I didn't. Yeah.
Oh, the MTV one downtown.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
remember that show. Yeah, yeah.
So we were
That was like
working on
early 2000s kind of
yeah
thing.
early 2000s. So at this point I was 18, was pretty young, and when we come into that studio, the studio was about kind of 60 people and stuff, and we were getting which is very much the case, I guess, how a lot of the studios work in this part of the world. We'll be getting the story structure and the animatics done, and also the pre-production design stuff was being done in the States or
Right.
Canada or wherever it was getting made, or the UK, and we were doing the animation production. So we were doing cleanup, we were doing inking and painting, which at that point was just turned digital, and we
Yeah, I
were
was about
doing
to say, are you still they're still doing that, and like,
now we
but I
were
guess they
I
were maybe using
our painting,
Photoshop or
but
something related to do
yeah, I think it was a very early. I can't remember what it was called, but there was a department
or
that was.
draw or
It
something
was
like
still slow. You were still drawing on hand, like we were
that.
still drawing on paper and stuff. So yeah, I was there for about 3 or 4 years, and started off as a cleanup artist, which I think is, and we talk to our people when they come in here now as well. Like it's cleanup is a really good place to start as far as you're working off someone's drawings who, for the most part, is probably a stronger draftsman than you are at a young age because they've been doing it for 10 years, or the animators have been doing it for 10 years. So you're learning a lot around how they're interpreting scenes, how they're drawing, and then your job is to basically just go in there and make it pretty, or put it on model, make like design decisions around tangents and yeah, just those little decisions, and just getting that pencil mileage on, which I think from when you're young is really key. And then from there, like once you're in cleanup, I moved into, we didn't really have an in-between department. It kind of just went straight to animation. And so I did maybe a year on cleanup, and then I went straight into animation. And then started doing animation, was doing that for probably 2 or 3 years, and then the studio lost their contracts, and it went belly up. And then I started my next phase. So basically, studio went belly up for unknown reasons. I was young, I wasn't privy to that kind of information. But and then I think at that point, Disney had just closed down their feature department in 2D, which was my kind of dream goal, I guess, as like a
Right.
17, 18-year-old, was to get to feature and work on Disney feature. And then once that had closed down, I think they'd just done Home on the Range or something, they decided that was it. And then the studio that I was working with in Auckland had just closed down, so I was like, okay, what am I going to do? So I went back and I trained again, but I did it in 3D. So I went back and trained in 3D, but very much around, I didn't want to be technical. So I basically just wanted to learn how to animate in 3D, do some design or do some story or layout stuff in 3D. I wasn't really interested in, the effects or the rigging and stuff like that. I just basically wanted to learn how to animate. So I did that. And then the studio started back up again. So I was doing
the 2D one, you mean?
the 2D studio started back up again. So at that point, I was 22, I guess, and I was the course that I was doing was only a year back in the day, so it was kind of so it was like a kind of a crash course in 3D fundamentals. So I was doing that during the half the day, and then I was going back to the studio for the other half of the day. And at that point, I was leading animation and stuff. So that was that kind of segment of my career, which was good. It kind of gave me I look back on it now, like the pencil mileage is just key. It's just like you just draw all day every day.
Right.
It just gets you better. And then so that was up until I was about 23, 24. I was at that studio doing that work.
And so, did you start up this Flux Studio, or did you join?
No, so I applied. Flux has been around for 25 years. So I'll just give a little bit of a breakdown on what we do here. So we've been around for 25 years. I'm the owner now. I've got a business partner, Josh Forsman, who runs the production, and I run the creative side of things. But been around for 25 years. Fundamentally, we are a cartoon / character studio. So that's kind of our selling point, is that character. If things have got character, that's where we kind of sit. That's what we like to do. We do other stuff. We do design and visual effects.
Yeah.
And kind of the whole bandit, or the whole bandwidth, but predominantly we are a character-based studio. So in the past, we did a lot of our own IP shows. So a lot of shows out of New Zealand for children's content. A lot of preschool shows in both the 2D and 3D, and then in Toon Boom, which is like the puppet style animation. So we had a lot of those shows like that going on, and 3D as well. And then aside from that, so that was one part of the studio, and then on the other side of the studio, we had a full-blown advertising department. So the advertising department was not advertising in the traditional sense, but just facilitating 3D and 2D advertising briefs, which we still do now, which is kind of still the fundamentals of the studio. We still have it's a little bit more free flowing, but there are we will always have long form jobs in the building, but we also have advertising jobs in the building, and that's kind of it's a really cool kind of balance, because long form gives you stability. It gives you an ability to get people on, get those young people in, and gives them the pencil mileage and stuff, and just time on the tools doing animation. Where advertising is a lot shorter run, it's a lot more varied, and it allows us to kind of go, 1 week we might be doing, a photoreal squirrel on live action plates, feature quality animation type thing, and then the next week, we might be doing very stylized 2D executions. And it's really great. The advertising allows us as a company to kind of, if you're in feature animation at Disney or somewhere like that, or DreamWorks or whatnot, if you're an animator, you're an animator for the most part. That's your job. Where with us, with our ability as far as being small enough and advertising, that if you're a modeler, you might be doing 3D modeling, but you also might want to be doing some lighting. So we allow the artists to kind of jump. Like they have predominantly been hired for one role, but we're a big selling point that we have here is that we try to allow people to kind of grow in different skill sets, and if they have an interest in effects or whatnot, that we try to facilitate that. And advertising is a great place to do that.
Sure. Well, actually, since you guys do a lot of smaller, like commercial work, and not everyone I talk to necessarily does that, can you kind of talk about, because some of my students may want to be in a smaller studio, where typically that's where you get more commercial work as opposed to like a feature or television show type situation. What can you explain kind of the process a little, like sort of soup to nuts, like, how does it, the client contacts you guys and they say, you want this and this, and you have set up meetings, you do storyboarding, and you kind of go through the process a little?
Yeah, cool. So it generally comes from, we do have direct to client sometimes, and I guess if you structure it like this, that the client's here, and whether or not the client's McDonald's or Amazon or whoever it is, then generally that's run by an agency. And so the agency is doing all the creative as far as the script writing and how they want to execute it, and then we're the production company. So an agency will come to us and they will say, we've got a script here, and we will, if the script is in our wheelhouse, we will then kind of, generally it's when you get depending on the size of the job, but generally there's a pitch process where a script will come to us, and it might go to another couple of animation companies as well. And our job as directors or our first jumping off point is then putting the treatment together of going, how are we going to execute this? What's the style? How do we, because I guess, an agency would generally have some sort of vision of how they want, and it can be varied. So sometimes they have a very clear vision around what they want, and we don't want to move the goalposts, and other times they're very open to us and how we interpret it. So our first jumping off point is then putting together a treatment. So we will do some style frames if we have time, and we'll do like mood reels and stuff, try to craft as much of, and generally you'll have like 2 weeks to kind of put that together, or a week, it depends. Sometimes more. Again, if it's a huge job, you'll have more time back and forth. If it's a small job, then it could be like a page of kind of reference and stuff. So that's generally the jumping off point, and that's when I like to that's when I come in as a director and probably spend most of my time as far as going, okay, here's how I think we can work it, here's how I think it's going to stand out and be different. And then we present that to the client, and then when we present it to the agency, and then the agency takes that back to the client, and the client will go, okay, listen, this is the way that I want to go. And then if we get green light, we're off. If we, and it's kind of like, you win some and you lose some, and it's because I guess the more you put your own spin on things, the more it can become either you're going to hit the mark or you're going to miss the mark. So you can kind of, and you're comfortable with that. Like, it's just sometimes it's not, they wanted to go somewhere else, someplace else. But it, that's just part of the process. And then so once we're awarded, I guess we kind of go and we have a sit down with the agency. It's a little animation in general is a little less forward facing with clients than say live action. We do have forward facing moments with the clients, but generally we're kind of working closely with the agency to kind of figure out what they want, and then the conduit to the client. So then basically we'll get into storyboarding. So we'll take the script, and generally, let's say if we're working on a 60-second brand commercial, we'll do the storyboards. We'll work closely with the agency around the structure. And when I say storyboards, we generally don't present storyboards like we used to traditionally back in the day. It's always as an animatic, so we're always editing it together, just because it answers a lot more questions from like a timing point of view and stuff. Like people can interpret storyboards however they want. It could run out to be like 5 minutes. We're actually, hey, listen, we've got 60 seconds. This is how we want to, and it's also a really good way of going, what's happening with the script, and going, actually there's too much here or there's not enough here, and once we see that in the 60-second spot that it's going to be. And that's the other good thing with advertising, is generally you're locked to either 60 or 30 or 45, or more or less, but it kind of has to work within that structure. So then work with an animatic, and while we're doing the animatic or the storyboards, we'll be working through our art direction. If it's got character design, if it's got color palettes and kind of color keys and stuff like that, all of that stuff will be kind of going on at that first initial sign-off point. From there, and again, because advertising generally has a timeline that we need to hit, it's generally kind of like, it'd be anywhere to 6 weeks to kind of maybe 6 months. It's generally a good time is probably like 14 weeks, 15 weeks as far as production goes, depending on the length. But that you have real heavy milestones as well, because you're also not dealing with clients that might not understand the process so much. So we need to step them through and say, hey, listen, especially like let's say we're doing a 3D spot, that once we do a character design, we need to now be moving into building those characters, and it all takes time. So if we're doing like a Disney Pixar style kind of spot with kind of, cartoon characters, we do the design, and then we're like, okay, we need to start building it, and we're building for a couple of weeks. So it's all staggered. So basically, so we get all our animatics signed off, we get our character designs signed off, and we move into character builds. And while that's going on, then we're working through layout and previs. So we're basically all on 3D at that point if it's a 3D job, and then it kind of trying to time everything out so everything kind of comes together for full production, or like animation at a certain time as well. It's really important for us to kind of take people through the process, so we try to get something finished looking pretty quickly, even if it's just a turnaround or a still or like some renders, so people have confidence what the end goal is, I guess. So that is really important from our point of view from the studio, to take agency and client through that and go, now here's where we will be, and now let's just and then you basically heads down, pushing forward with the animation, and then the lighting and the rendering and the effects and the compositing.
At what point do you sort of lock the story and the characters, and you say you can't make any changes beyond this point?
There's always like, we try to lock pretty early on. Like I think like maybe a quarter of the way through, we want to have the story locked from an animatic point of view, and then we're always generally in a advertising, there's always checkpoints. It's probably every once a week, once every 2 weeks, where people are feeding back. They're giving feedback around the whole process really. So you are always making changes. And sometimes we do revert back and go back and change the animatic. That generally has some repercussions as far as timing goes or something, but there's always you have to be nimble enough to kind of go, okay, nothing's set in stone. And I think the big thing is also from my point of view, and you're not making a short film for yourself, you're making you're making something from an agency point of view, where there are creatives there who have their vision around what they've sold to their client, and the
Sure.
client has their own kind of perception of what they want out of it. So there's a level of kind of, yes, you want to bring your creativity forward and your best foot forward and your best ideas, but at the end of the day, you have to be willing to kind of go, hey, listen, there's more. This is not my short film. This is a collective. Right. We're trying to make something. So you have to be aware of that, and I think that's something that you learn. Excuse me, you learn the longer you've been doing it, when to push back and when to like hold your own and say, listen, I really think this needs to be in the story, and then by other times you just go like, sorry, that's not appropriate, or that's not going to fly, or we want to go this way, and you then have to go, okay, that's cool. So it's a balance, but you have to learn that over many. Like I've been doing it for 25 years now, so you learn when to engage with that and then when to let it slide, kind of thing.
Right. Where do you see animation going? As someone who's been in it pretty much your whole life, and
yeah,
bring it as a child, how do you feel like animation, if at all, is changing at all, or has?
I think from when I started out, there's a lot more accessibility, which I think is great. Okay. Almost to the point where it's too accessible, and you can kind of do it on like when I started out, you either had to have, like, I was drawing on multiple pieces of paper and taking pictures with a digital camera kind of thing, and trying to edit them together in a very early version of After Effects kind of thing. But now I think there's so much access to software and stuff like that. Okay. Cost is no boundary as far as you can be doing it on an iPad and an iPad with some of the apps that like Procreate and stuff like that. You can we're using that stuff in studio, and so are the other
no, I know.
So that's
a lot of
that's a $25 app or something. So it's like you can. There's no boundary, where back in the day there was huge boundaries about, and also the content that's online. Like there's so much content, and not necessarily all of it's good, but there is a lot of great content out there as far as learning and stuff goes. So you have so much access to around, like, hey, if you want to figure out how to do something in After Effects, there's a tutorial. You don't have to pay for it. It's just you just YouTube it and stuff.
Right. So I think a lot more specific YouTube, video knowledge that wasn't available when you went on.
No, yeah, totally. There's so much of that, and I think what that does, it allows it to kind of, there's people telling stories in a way that that was harder 20 years ago. You had to it's people can get their stories out a lot easier, I think, which is cool. From an industry point of view, I don't see like everyone talks around, like we're a little bit different in New Zealand. We're a bit like we're quite isolated down here, so we don't really see how things are happening in the States as far as kind of like the bigger studios and stuff. But I think like there's always going to be a need for content and diversity in content. I think I wouldn't be opposed. Like I don't think it's going anywhere. I think there's like with the streaming, there's a lot more content being made. Like I think back to in the 2000s and stuff, before streaming and everything, there was only probably a certain amount of features a year being made in a couple of big studios, and I think now. From a global standpoint, there's a lot more content being made, not necessarily at that level. A lot of that content's kind of potentially not at the level that it was, but that's fine. That's totally cool. It's like as long as things are getting made, it's like there's different brackets for So I think that's a really good thing in the industry, and also where that stuff's being made. Like it's not now isolated. There's industries opening up all around the world. Where like in South Africa's got a really big industry now. New Zealand's got a big industry. Australia's got a huge industry. So it's not kind of set up to the US and Canada and stuff as it was, or the UK back kind of 20 years ago, I think. So you can kind of, there's accessibility to kind of where you are, and also in saying that as well, like people are, no one's opposed to remote work so much that we use artists that are in the Philippines and in Japan and Tahiti and stuff that are just kind of remote, and we have a lot of people in the studio, and we ideally want them in the studio from like a kind of continuity and kind of learning, and just it helps us from a creative point of view, but we're not opposed to having people working remote. So all those restraints that used to be there, accessibility, price points, and all that stuff, I think there's a lot more. Yeah, if you want to do it, there's a way to do it now.
Sure. some of the things I was going to say. What advice would you give students kind of starting out in this area that maybe you wish you had known, or maybe you feel is different now than maybe when you were in college or that kind of point in your life?
I don't think I don't necessarily think it's different. I just kind of think that like it's a tricky industry. It's a tough industry, but it's a great industry, right? So it's like no matter how good you are or how good you are in your high school, if you're the best artist in your high school or whatever, or in your neighborhood, when you get into the industry, it's like you should always be striving, especially when you're starting, to learn as much as you can. You know, you're going to be a small fish in a big pond of people trying to get a certain amount of jobs.
Right.
So I would say putting your head down. I think it's still that age old kind of thing. If you work hard, and you know you communicate, I think people really underestimate that. I think like unless you're in a kind of big factory studio where you're just putting your head down and you're kind of doing a certain job, communication and being able to verbally kind of communicate with people, and take feedback and like be willing to learn and not being too precious. I think there is all of those attributes that you could apply to any form of employment or life, right? You just want to have integrity with what you're doing, put your best foot forward. Always be willing to learn. If you just want to come in and click on and click off kind of thing, that becomes pretty apparent. You know, if you're getting into animation, you're really kind of doing it because it's a lifestyle choice around, you know, this is your passion, you want to make art. And so it's about kind of putting as much effort as you can in those early stages around kind of taking all of that information in. And I think and just being open to critique, being not too precious, being if you're asked to kind of do this, just it might not be where you want to be straight away.
Sure.
You know, but the time that you put in is kind of invaluable as far as, you know, you might just be doing cleanup like I did for a year, and that might not be what you want to do. You might want to be an animator straight away, but there's a rhyme and a reason why, you know, when you start out, you're in a certain role and then it's kind of progressing forward from there. So, and like, that's not always 100% the case. There are people that come in and go straight to story or straight to art direction or design. There are those kind of, there are those, it's my business partner. There are those elements around that certain people can go straight there. So it's just being open.
Right. My students are probably going to want to know this, even though I don't think it's as relevant. What programs do you guys use in your studio?
We use a bit of everything, so it doesn't really matter. Well, if you're learning, like I guess from industry standard, I guess, and a lot of the people that we come in now are using like Blender and stuff like that, which is great if you're jumping on because it's free, and like the film that won the Oscar just was created in Blender. So there is
so I actually teach Blender, so I tell my students that stuff. So
So we have a few people in the office that know Blender. I guess from our point of view, and again, you kind of get not stuck, but our studio has always been Maya led. So we have Maya for our 3D pipeline, and then we're introducing. We use a lot of Houdini and stuff.
Sure, yeah.
And then we use a lot of Unreal. So realistically, so kind of a lot more real-time interaction components that we're using for some of our advertising work. So out of this in sports in the States, we use a lot of real-time activations. And then from a traditional 2D point of view, we use Toon Boom, which is kind of standard now, I think. Pretty standard.
Most studios I talk to.
Yeah, I think it's become a lot more accessible. And again, now because, you know, back in the day we had to buy these softwares, right? Now you can rent them, and the student, you know, so back in the day, you know, you're paying 30 grand or something for a license, where now you can rent it monthly or whatever, and I think the student rates are pretty good. But again, you know, we have artists here that, and obviously all the Adobe suites and stuff for painting, and then we use Nuke for our compositing for the most part. So we're doing that. We use that for more of our high-end visual effects type compositing, and then if we're doing 2D stuff, we still composite in After Effects. So a little bit of everything, and it's just kind of more around, like I use Procreate for when I'm doing my boards and stuff. So it does all like just a pen and paper, you know, like that's kind of how I do my thumbnails and We still
Right.
have artists that everything is digital now for the most part from the animation point of view as far as drawing and stuff goes, but just from a pipeline point of view. But yeah, we still draw and we still, yeah, any tool works really, I guess.
Great. Well, we appreciate your time. Is there you have like a public place, people like a website or a
Yeah,
social
I do.
media handle?
Yeah. It's called Flux Media, FLUXmedia.co.nz. So
Right.
you'll be able to see the work there, and you'll be able to see how varied it is. We're really proud of all the work that we do,
Mhm.
and it's a cool and advertising, and like we are an advertiser, but we are also a non-com. So you can see I think the big thing about our company is the diversity of the work that we do, which is what I find the most engaging and interesting. Is that it's a different job or multiple jobs each day, multiple different disciplines. You might be doing Mickey Mouse one day, and then you're doing a photoreal bird the next day. So, or a photoreal mouse versus a cartoon mouse. But yeah, it's good fun. It's a great career path, and it's if I say your students that if they put their heads down and they want to do it, it's a very very rewarding, and you never feel like you're working.
Sure.
Little
Well, we
pleasure.
appreciate your time. Thank
Cool. All
you.
right. Thanks, David.